To do a one mean confidence interval follows the same type of steps that a one proportion confidence interval does. The first thing we'll always do is go ahead and list. We'll list the same type of things. The first thing we need to do is list our point estimate. The difference is our point estimate isn't p hat, because p hat is a proportion. Instead, our point estimate is x bar. That is, it's the average of whatever sample we're actually dealing with. Aside from x bar, we need to list a couple other things. If we know the mean, we can also find the standard deviation. So we'll list S, that is the standard deviation of the sample. After S, we'll go ahead and we'll list N. We need our sample size so that we can go ahead and find degrees of freedom. Remember, our degrees of freedom, if we're dealing with one sample, is always going to be N minus 1. After I've found my degrees of freedom, I use that to go ahead and find my t-score. Our t-score is not always going to be 1.96 like it was for a z-score with 95% confidence. Instead, to find the t-score we need, we'll go to our t-table, we'll trace the confidence level up and our degrees of freedom over. Where those two intersect, that'll give us the t-score we need. We list all of this in the beginning so that in step 2 we can just perform our calculations. There's only one calculation we need to do, and it's the same calculation we did for proportions. That is, we need to find SE. I want to be clear here that S is the standard deviation of our sample, the actual data we found. SE is an estimate for how spread out our samples would be from each other. So difference, S, measures variation between people. SE, we're estimating the standard deviation between different samples. Our formula for SE is a little bit different when we're dealing with means. We don't need to take the square root of p hat or anything. It does still involve a square root though. Our formula for SE is going to be S, that is our sample standard deviation, divided by the square root of n. After I've done my list step and my calculation step, the third step is to go ahead and put my interval together. To put my interval together, I always start by putting my point estimate, that is x bar in this case. I then add plus or minus my margin of error. My margin of error is a lot like I did for proportions. It is the measure of how many standard deviations, which isn't z in this case, it's t, times my estimate of my standard deviation, which is SC. So this will give me my interval. When I go to state this interval, we'll go ahead and say we are blank % confident that the true average in this case for whoever our population is between whatever value we have and whatever value we got on the top end. Pay attention to this, it's not percentages. So I don't have to multiply anything by 100, and I shouldn't put percentages after those two numbers.